The mood has changed, and it's interesting because in the past we would see American negotiators a little bit more negative when it comes to conversations with the Europeans. Now things have changed, and we actually have the European Union sounding a lot more downbeat when it comes to a potential outcome of trade negotiations with the United States. In fact, one European official told me over the weekend, we have no illusions anymore. And I understand that, sometimes European jargon is hard to understand, but we have to discuss this anti-coercion tool because it is a very important tool that the EU has. They developed this actually, in fact, to deal with trade matters against China. But they're now considering using this against the United States. And one thing that changed over the weekend was actually that now Germany is a country openly talking about potentially using this tool. And Germany is perhaps the keenest of all the member states to have a trade compromise with the Americans. So that just really tells you of where we are in these trade conversations with the U.S. But ultimately, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of a deal. Because usually when we are following conversations, between two countries and two blocs, there's always at one point where things seem to go a little bit more negative, and then at the end of the day, there's always a resolution. So for the time being, I wouldn't exclude that possibility. But the reality on the ground is that the Europeans are a little bit more downbeat, and they are preparing for any eventuality.
How relevant is the August 1st deadline to the EU-U.S. talks? Over the weekend, we heard Howard Lutnick say that from August 1st, yes, we can continue trade conversations after this deadline, but that's when you have to start paying. And for Europe, that means 30% tariffs.
Yeah, which would be huge. And as the Commissioner has highlighted, this would actually bring trade to some extent to a standstill between both blocs. The ultimate problem with the deadlines is that they have shifted in the past. And so even in Brussels, they are not really sure whether that is actually a final deadline, even though we had that comment from Lutnick at the end of over the weekend, I would suggest. However, it's also worth keeping in mind what the EU is still trying to achieve in the conversations. And one of my sources explained to me that despite that report from the FT suggesting that President Trump was looking at tariffs of 15 to 20%, Brussels is still pushing for a 10% baseline rate, with carve-outs, of course, but they're still pushing for that level, which would be the same as the UK. So it remains to be seen not just whether we're going to get a deal, but ultimately what sort of detail we're going to get.
Can we go back to the nuclear option, though, the anti-coercion instrument? What would that entail? I mean, you always read about the tax on big tech. What else would it entail? And where would it hurt the most? Is it big tech?
It could be big tech, and it would likely be big tech because they would have that option, which the reality of this tool is that allows the European Commission to more easily target the U.S. economy. And they can choose that based on where it would hurt the most. And it is in digital services. It is big tech that could be hurt the most if indeed they decide to use this tool. It does sound like an extreme step from a European perspective, but the fact that they are discussing it, they're discussing it openly, and it is coming from Germany, it is very meaningful at this stage.
You talk about how Germany has sort of shifted its stance on the anti-coercion instrument. We know Germany has been pushing for carve-outs for the German auto industry, and that seems to be one of the sticking points here, that President Trump, according to reports, doesn't want to give in and give any leeway here.
It's so fascinating because actually just before that July 9th deadline, we were very close to a deal. The Europeans were expecting that they could be announcing a deal very shortly. Ultimately, President Trump was not happy with the deal, and he decided we're not going to do this, and hence why we still have these conversations going on. So ultimately, and Brussels is very aware of that, whatever is on the table, it needs to be accepted by the president, or else there's no compromises whatsoever. And that also involves his opinion when it comes to the auto sector. He doesn't want to really change that, and he actually wants Europeans to buy more American cars as well. So again, at this stage, I'm afraid it still remains to be seen, and detail is still lacking.
Is it safe to assume that no one in Brussels is going on holiday anytime soon until this is sorted out? Because that's what usually happens in Brussels of the summer. It's like tumbleweeds. It's empty, right?
You're touching a very sensitive point.
I know.
People want to take their August holiday.
They do.
So they have 2 weeks. Let's see what's going to happen.
This is tricky.